Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Ctrl Alt Debate. In this episode, we'll be discussing about protests and its latest trends and how social media is changing the mode of protest. So let's introduce our guests. Let's start with Manoj.
Hi everyone, I'm Manoj. I'm currently based out of Jakarta in Indonesia. I work as a consultant.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jono. I'm joining from Hong Kong. My background is as a 14, 15-year-old. I engaged in student protest, and I've been a witness here in Hong Kong for 27 years, looking at three different protests that happened in Hong Kong. And I like to look at exactly how the new emerging social media has influenced and enabled or not these various protests.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manas. I'm from India. I just try to understand things, what leads to different activities, and what's the ideology behind any of the movements. Okay, so Jonah, maybe you have been the only one to witness the thing. In actuality, I have just been a bystander reading information, and I think Manoj, have you been part of any of the movements? Like, I have never been part of any.
I,
I've just been a bystander. The only time I've ever been a part of an event was in 2012, Jan Lokpal event, but that too because I was a student and my seniors dragged me to it. Had absolutely zero idea as to what I was getting into back then.
yeah, same. I have been to some protests.
Didn't do much research. I just did a bit of scribbling and other things. Man, there have been quite a lot of uprisings in the past 10 years, like Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Nepal, Philippines, South Korea, Thailand, Hong Kong.
I mean, what I would say is we want to be a little bit careful about the phrasing. I mean, there have been some protests in Hong Kong, and then there was a student versus police conflict, but I wouldn't call it an uprising. It was more of a, well, I guess it was political in a way, but yeah, I don't know. I think we should describe.
I think most have been political because of one policy or the other. I was just going through most of them. If I could figure out a couple of common reasons, most of have been because of the economic instability and the growing difference between the population, like top 5% versus the remaining and other things.
I think the fundamental reasons I completely agree. I just find that when I looked into, I mean, I wanted to make sure I had my understanding of what even happened in Hong Kong while I was here. And the thing is that at least the Western media have misrepresented quite a lot of things. And I remember, for example, the umbrella protests back in 2013, which were actually an offspin of the Occupy Wall Street protests. There was a massive disagreement from the youth about the enfranchisement and the wealth inequality. And so what ended up being a conflict in Mongkok was actually started by protesting Central. It started with a Central protest, and the Central protest was against the bankers and the hedge funds. And then later on, you look back on it, you look at the Western media, and it all says it's about democracy, and it was nothing to do with democracy. So it was socio-economic and political in that way, but it wasn't the way the West represented it. And given that I know that because I was here.
So somewhere down the line,
Yes.
every movement that I read, all of them actually started with some minor issues. Like one in Bangladesh started off with a bus accident. The compensation and the way police reacted to it, the government, how it dealt with it. But it's like triggering point have been pretty much different for all the places. But the connecting factor for the people across have been some, I mean, you have to have a common enemy to come together. And at most of the places,
True.
either economics became your common enemy or the political situation became your common enemy.
But I think I agree with what you said at the beginning, because it's usually the majority of people have little wealth, and the people with wealth by de facto have power. And so it's often the youth who are disadvantaged, realizing that no matter how hard they work, they'll never be able to have any political power because they'll never have monetary power. And so it's more of a resentment of their situation. And it manifests in many different ways.
Just trying to understand the ongoing events. All I could figure out was that in order to get people on the common ground, the inadequacies of the government did the part. Other than that, all of them pretty much have nothing else in common.
I
I
guess
mean,
it's symptomatic.
it's
There's
hard to
also
actually figure out what led to all these things. I mean, one thing could be that because information flow has become relatively faster. So before the emotions around an event dies out, people do get an information. So that like Nepal used Discord, an internet tool thing. Bangladesh used Facebook, and so information flow was faster. People got together faster.
well, what I found interesting is I believe that these sorts of protests have been going on at the same quantity for the last 100 years, except that we didn't know about them. Because I went to look, I was in a protest march for the environment in Adelaide back in 1988 or 1989, and we got about 100,000 students, and we blocked most of Adelaide for about a day, and there's no media record of this ever happening. There's no way of knowing, even in the Australian media, it's gone. So I'm wondering how many, whether we're looking at these things as being recent or whether they've been happening all the time, but we just didn't know about them because of less media, the lack of the internet, and so on. I'm just wondering.
I agree to a
It might
particular
be a
point because
natural
even
thing.
in India in 1980s, we did had an uprising against the emergency that was declared by the then Prime Minister. And not a lot of information is out there in the public. There's more misinformation than there
Mm,
actually is any kind of an information. I was watching this documentary
that's what.
where some of the people who were actually jailed back in 1980s, they have remained till 2000. I mean, the thing ended, things changed and everything. Even still, these peoples were not acquitted or anything as such. And nobody even knows about all those things because nobody bothered to cover it once
Yeah,
this entire thing was cooled off and people in a way got basically what they wanted to get through it, even if on a basic level. So most of the governments, what
yeah.
they do is that they agree to a certain point and just to fizzle things out a little. And thereafter, everybody else who's involved are just left out holding the bags. And there isn't much respite for such people. And nobody even covers them after a period of time because you would not be getting that many number of people interested because they would be like, okay, this was done, this has been taken care of, let's just move forward.
I think that's echoes my experience when I was 14 because we organized, we were 14, 15, we organized the protest. It was an environmental protest against actions in Australia. We organized it, we executed it, and then within about 3 months after that, our group was disrupted by secondary and tertiary issues. A whole bunch of people turned up and they started talking about Aboriginal land rights and they're legitimizing marijuana and a whole bunch of other stuff. And eventually the whole group dissolved because there was no coherence. But I was also thinking that maybe these youth activated protests are a common thing, very much like children rebelling against their parents, that the young people like to also protest a bit about the government to, assert some form of authority. And then after this happens, then other things contaminate or add themselves to the protest. I don't know. I'm just wondering if.
And then you go back to the
Mm.
same people against you started the resurgence. And then these people pretty much take over the revolution. They take it in the direction they wanted it to. It's like removing A for a B, in which A and B are pretty much the similar. Because people who are actually getting the thing started, they are again left out because all they know is to revolt. They do not know what to do once they have some kind of
Once
win over the existing power.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I think that's certainly the modern way things happen. That the activation is grassroots and local, and then other forces get involved and see if they can utilize the energy. That makes sense to me, but I don't know. I mean, again, all I can comment on is what I witnessed in Hong Kong, and even then, I'm not entirely sure because I wasn't in the movements or anything. So I can only comment on what I saw. But it's the amount, I mean, we know the umbrella movement existed. We know that there were student protests more recently in 2019. But the origins of both were a different thing to what they ended up being. And we certainly know in the last one that there was quite a lot of foreign influence. Yeah, I don't know. It seems to me that It's very hard, even though I was here and I saw them. It's still hard for me to understand exactly what happened.
So the recent events, of course, in Nepal, actually, to be very fair, on the Nepal thing, I have only followed what would be secondary information, meaning just after it happened, it became massive after the things happened, right? So then by that time, I think, and it was very rapid, I think, but incidentally, around at the same time, Indonesia, in Jakarta, there were protests for a week, but it fizzled out.
Well, I think youth being the reason that they're looking for an agenda and they have more free time on their hands. They
No,
have a hotter blood. They are still not boggled down by family and responsibilities and other things. So they take more risk than we actually do.
I'm not that cynical. I really think that the youth cares and cares enough. And sometimes maybe it's about mobilization. So, for example, the recent Indonesia protest, it has been long. So the funny thing about Indonesia, I think it applies to a little bit in one common thread is a common perception around people finding that no political party, like a nihilistic view that, okay, politics itself is bad. So in Indonesia, for example, recently, just 1 year, right? The president will complete 1 year now in the next month. But there were protests because rising living cost of living and everything. There were protests, but it fizzled out very quickly. Ride-hailing driver, basically, he was killed. There was some mobilization, but a week later, it was all okay. My theory around that is because in Indonesia has a uh, funny system where almost every political party is in the government. So there is no voice that an opposition voice, credible opposition voice that people would trust. So then, and I was also very surprised coming from India, where protest usually genuine protest will always have this caveat that, okay, we do not support violence, for example. But in Indonesia, I think the
I
first
don't
day
think
or
there
almost
ever
the
has
second day
been a
there were
genuine
violence.
protest. Not at least in our
No,
time.
genuine or not, who are we to judge on what is genuine, right? Sitting here I'm sitting in Jakarta, right? But I would not claim to
Hmm.
understand most of the challenges. But genuine or not, I was surprised with how quickly it became violent. Violent in the sense that, okay, burning, like some bus shelters were burned down and all those. And I think it is basically around, there is no, um, like somebody, like a legitimate counter voice to the prevailing sentiment so that someone could organize. Now, the challenge with youth is, of course, they're idealistic, but they still, I would not, even because in Tahrir Square, I think that protest, the siege of the Tahrir Square lasted for a long, long time. But of course, it fizzled out later. But it did, and one of the things that they do, I think nowadays it's very common in protests that, okay, we don't have a recognized leader. That creates its own challenges, because then you are, and why is this happening is because digital media is allowing us that level of coordination. So I'm sure Jono would agree, because the little I was reading about Hong Kong protest was that about the level of coordination, and despite everyone knowing that, okay, most likely there is online surveillance is very high, but people were able to use digital media to coordinate, and then initially, at least, there is no felt need for a leader. Now, of course, and then at some point it gets, of course, people want to sabotage those things, and then someone goes somewhere off, and all of those things happen. But Tahrir Square is an example. The counterpoint in India was via protests. I think the biggest that we saw, at least, if I'm not wrong, is in this 2011, 2012, 2013 phase, where a new political party got formed. But it was a lot more mobilized. Mobilized in the sense that there was an active organization that was managing those protests. Again, not commenting on either the genuineness or was there a need for protests and all of those things aside. But because you are able to do it, at least it draft now again 10 15 years later, we might think that, okay, that did not serve any purpose, because the political party that came out of it almost is now similar to every other political party. So those things aside, but I think that central mobilization, and then having an organization that sort of can manage the protest is maybe something that gives us a signal that either it is a good or it will survive or not survive, and it is successful or not, I think. Protests in the digital age, what the work of Zainab Tufekci and others with the Takshashila Institution in India, the work around radically networked society. So because of technology, because of internet, we are living in a society which is networked, right? Networked, and so and the framework to assess how protests are happening in radically networked societies. I think there are three. The framework itself talks about three main pillars. So obviously, the one is the political aspect, that there is always an immediate cause to start a protest, and so there will always be some latent, like people have this latent unhappiness about how sometimes it's the government, sometimes, as Jono mentioned, the tax, the imposition of GST, or at least the attempt to, was the trigger that sort of triggers dissatisfaction that people have with, sometimes with governments, but usually these things are about something that the government does. But then the other aspect is around scalability because of internet. So as Jono mentioned again, because it gives a useful uh, um, counterpoint that, okay, when they did the protest in 1988, it necessarily involved time, because you have to go, you have to mobilize, and all of those things in a pre-digital age takes time. And I would say sometimes that deliberate this thing also leads to also has its own consequences, that because you have spent so much time, maybe they are better run, or maybe there are other challenges. And then there is an social, the other aspect is around identity. The people who are protesting all have a common identity. Some of it may be like just a shared digital identity. So, for example, in India, when the protests in 2011, 2012, or the farmers' movement that happened, I think just before COVID hit, all of those things, the identity part also, that all of them either are, when you're protesting, you are protesting for farmers, even though you are not farmers per se, right? So there is a difference between the farmers who are on supporting them, or either supporting them or not supporting them. So that identity part so comes in. So these are the three. I think this framework actually explains a lot of how protests get formed. So and then all of it has its own cause. That when you start with an immediate cause, and I think we were also discussing before we started, that sort of demands, or sort of demands get added in. It just, because that is the nature of the scale that you are able to achieve. So obviously, no two persons will have a similar demand, and then once you have a mass mobilization, then obviously many people have many demands, and without the structure of a, or at least I think we should, now this is a reality. So because you are so radically networked, that you can always have smaller groups, and it is viable to have smaller groups with specific demands. Earlier it would be like, okay, the whole group has to have 5 demands. Now it is like, okay, we can have 20 groups having their own 5 demands, but all of it is still under that overall umbrella network, umbrella protest. So yeah, those things, I think, just to kick off, these are the things I think. Protests in Nepal, I think some of it was there. Protests in India back in 2011, 2012. Protests in Indonesia, which periodically keep coming up and fizzle out. Tahrir Square, I think it is an interesting case study of the siege for lasting for so long without having what would be called a proper leadership. It was always, always a shared leadership type. That we don't have leaders was one of the rallying points. Yeah, I'll just pause here.
I think a couple of points. Firstly, there's a very great speech by Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream. Back in 1965, people came together without having any kind of an internet or other things. Because back then, they were mostly motivated by some emotion that all of them shared. The passing down of information wasn't that easy. So things grew more organically. Time to develop your understanding of what's going on, made a choice, and then chipped in. In the recent movements, like you already mentioned, that within a span of 2.5 months, something boils out, becomes violent, causes some kind of crack in the system, and then subsides. I think with technology, yes, accumulation and information sharing has become faster, but on the negative side, because we aren't spending enough time to understand the legitimacy or the reasons that are behind a movement, it actually weakens the movement before it even like faces off. Past 10 years, if we have to look at the data, there have been more than, even if we are just talking about the Asian countries, more than 15 countries saw some kind of movements.
Yeah, Jono, I think what social media does is, and I totally agree. These are what, only about 10 years, 10, 15 years, then this has been being used. But I think it just increases the speed of mobilization and all that. We should not see protests only as people getting down to the on physical roads, right? But you could always so what internet and social media does or enables is you can have communities which protest and which are totally digital, and it'll be very difficult for you without technology to find someone who believes in what you believe in, and you believe that okay, something is worth protesting. Technology or social media makes it easier for you to find fellow travelers who may not necessarily be in the same city also. So for example, there was some protest in Indonesia, and I'm sorry, I don't fully understand the imagery, but there are people who were on social media putting up a image of a meme and then started floating around in this thing. The president of Indonesia had to comment on it. And then, of course, some people put the flag outside their homes. And then the president of Indonesia had to comment just to say that, okay, it's fine for people to comment. But who would have thought that without social media, so that actually registers, right? So social media, I think, technology, I think, enables that part. We don't know for sure how many people in Indonesia would subscribe to something like that, but because you are able to make it a meme, make it go viral, those things are also there. So those kinds of protests also sort of are instrumental. Not, of course, all of it should lead to the change of government.
I don't, yeah, I agree to that particular point. We can always do small things for big changes, and anything big always starts small. So even a single meme or maybe a post or a comment or a remark, they actually amount to something. Changes can be introduced faster. People can get together faster. You can be a part of an event at your own convenience as well. Often at times it so happens that because you do not have people around you, so you feel a little powerless. But when even if on a digital scale, if you do have like people are supporting a cause, it definitely adds to the value of the whole thing. Yeah, so I think, but the reason I said that is because it's something spreading so fast, I don't see it getting to the outcome actually. That's my only concern. So it's big, yeah.
I think it's funny. It's slightly interesting that. So I, of course, so if you put it in binary questions, like do you think that protests are a good form of letting, or are protests good? Yes, right. I would say yes, right. Is people should have the right to protest. Now,
I
Press is
think
do
always
we
good.
do we then, but what it means always is, so for example, something, the protest that happened in Bangladesh, obviously it started off with something small. Government responded with high-handedness in how they were dealing with it, and all of it was not like recent events. People who follow Bangladesh, for example, have been talking about the Sheikh Hasina government, really, because the last election was the opposition boycotted it, and then it was what some would say not a very fair, free and fair elections, and all of these things were there. But the immediate trigger was something, right? Some very small thing, and then government responded with something, and then people protested. And I'm sure when they started protesting, they did not even imagine that they will be able to change the government. It happens, and as a result, I think many people will have different points of view on is the new regime that is there, and of course they'll be having elections soon. Hopefully, it's a better outcome, but maybe maybe the outcome is not good, or outcome is not what we want. But for the protesters on that day or during that time, I think did they really have it? So the nihilism also goes both ways, right? Okay, what bad will come? Like it is so bad that what bad can happen? What more bad can happen, right? So they're just going with it. But of course, I think in my experience, only with India protests, because when the Jan Lokpal bill happened, and it is not a technically a fully digital sort of protest. It was very well thought through. There was an organization around it, but how they went about doing things was like almost threatening that okay, if you don't pass this bill, we will keep protesting. And of course, they had mass support during that time. But the outcome of it, I don't think outcome which negates democratic politics at the end of it will most likely be not be a good outcome. And then I'm not very sure of how the hijacking of it happens, but I'm sure some hijacking is happening, right? But I don't know, and I don't fully subscribe that it's always the foreign forces, which our governments actually like to tell it always. Everything that
Yeah, it's
is
just a
bad in this country
narration.
is foreign this thing. But some things may be happening. I don't know. But the thing is, yes, you should be able to protest. Yes, you are protesting, and when you are protesting, you are always doing it with some idealistic state of mind, and then reality hits. It will never be that idealistic. But in some cases, I think any change is good. In some cases, of course, for example, Nepal, they have been having what? Every year almost the government changes. Unstable politics then always maybe I think leads to things like this. While in India, yes, temporarily loss of legitimacy, and then very quickly, because you have this history of political mobilization and politics around it, just the experience, sheer experience of going through the political system, I think, in India's case, because of course, from in developing countries or decolonized countries, I think that India is a good example of how much less violence has happened due to protest. Of course, we have had our black like periods in history where the emergency, for example. So we do, as governments or as a country, we have done bad things, but somehow uh, the political system sort of is able to. I sound like I'm giving credit to the political system, but yeah.
I mean, the only information I could access of about Tahrir Square, which is available in English or some other language, was from this guy. I did come across a couple of good documentaries, but most of them were in the regional languages. I was just not able to understand any of it. There are quite a.
There is a very good book.
What's the name of the writer?
Wait. Zen. So the book is Zen by Zeynep Tufekci, Twitter and Tear Gas: The Power and Fragility of Networked Protest. It's a good book. It's I think most of the story is around because she was there in the,
Are there any interviews of her available in English?
yeah, she writes in New York Times and everything. So
The more old it starts to get, you start to get rid of the information. जॉर्ज ऑरवेल की भाषा में से डबल स्पीक बोलते हैं वो हर दिन इतिहास लिखते रहते हैं so they either tweak the information, get it off. Now, maybe we could bring it down to Indian context. There have been one too many protests in the past 5-10 years. I mean, even if we are just to talk about the paper league protests, there have been more than 10, 20. Every month there has been a protest in some of the states. Last month you had in Uttarakhand and Bihar. Prior to that you had in Delhi. Prior to that you had in Madhya Pradesh. So, protest is necessary for any democracy, but then again, it doesn't remain pure. My problem with protest is that people who are actually are modest. They start off on a scared note and then you get all kind of nonsense creating people. They pretty much take over the entire event. And we at the time you've had an event, you have always ended up with even a worse outcome.
yeah, purity is a myth, right? I think it's the same thing in government, no? When you keep hearing common minimum agenda, that basically means it's the same with protests. Now, would you blame that decision because that decision led to a change of government after an emergency, which I think is a good thing. Now, some of it will always have repercussions, right? Of actions, some actions, but at that point, I think it was necessary that you. I don't actually, frankly, know the extent of this cooperation and all, but we know that okay, Jansang and
I believe to save you, I
was
believe
part
to
of the
save
one of the
yourself from
same.
the hunter, you don't go to the butcher.
No. In hindsight, it's always easy, and frankly,
Or
anybody who
yeah,
knows me or my politics, I'll agree to this. But the point is, yeah,
you
I'll
cannot
agree
make a
to the
judgment
bad.
when it's happening. You can always analyze it later on. So yeah, I
Yeah.
get
So I'm just
that
saying
point.
that, okay, with protest, no. My basic point is that with protests, when you're trying to achieve something, it will no two people like we are the same, no two people are the same or have the same opinion. So the idea is to mobilize enough people who are ready to let go of some of the extreme stuff that they want to believe in, have a common agenda and get something done. Now, for that,
Out of
coalition
10, I
building is
pick two, you pick two, and then we
yeah.
together we fight for those two.
So coalition building is an essential part, or should be an essential part. With sometimes social media helps, because
Social media has
just
helped a
because
lot in most of the spaces with people having limited or no resources at all.
yeah.
Messaging has actually empowered people to a very high extent. I mean, had it not been of social media, we would not have been able to get even information. Like back in 90s, we used to watch television news considering that that's the information. But even back then, it wasn't. I mean,
Yeah,
it
so that,
wasn't
that that
as
is the point,
corrupt
right?
as it is today. But back then also, it wasn't anything which was like working for the people. It was again working for the people who were running the show. At least social
Yeah.
media gives you an alternative voice, be it good, be it bad, but you have access to that many number of variants of the same event. You can take a pick, you can do your research, come out with your own conclusion, but at least you know the options.
Yeah, and I think one of the other aspects of social media is that what it does is it then, which I'm a victim of, not a victim, I also do this, that sometimes it's just outrage. Social media makes
That's
it
my
very, very
concern. No,
useful.
that's the thing
No,
that we are
I'd not be
angry.
concerned with it. I'm okay. I'm okay with it. I'm not this thing, but
Next to a protesting side.
no, no, no. I'll tell you. I'll tell you. No, I'll give you a comparison, right? For example, again here, right? I see. So when this protest happened in Indonesia a month ago, I think, for a week, right? I saw a lot of my friends and people that I know here. All of them are active on Insta, Twitter, protesting, supporting them, and some of them actually go. But that people who actually go to the protest is that number is invariably low. And some even that outrage itself, while some people, yeah, we can have multiple opinions that, okay, some, if you are so concerned, why don't you go there? But just outraging also somehow, because I think governments are increasingly well aware that of how digital mediums can be leveraged for their benefit, but also to create a perception, or it can cause damage to the government also. So they do track it. So when you are also just outraging, so I think, yeah, in some total, sometimes that outrage can become very, how do I say, very superficial, that you're not really that concerned with. It's easy, right? In terms of that, it's just easy to just like and retweet something than going and actually studying and researching. But yeah, on balance, I think it's still okay to just do that retweet. I think that is also okay.
That is, I would say that even if you're not able to be present physically, showing your concern even via digital medium does add to the legitimacy and the potency of any of the events. Because look, the biggest power that a government needs to have on its side is to control the narration. If they are able to control the narration, they can, because in most of the countries, not just India, the biggest chunk of the population is the dormant one. They do not come out in open. Like even if you look at the Brexit, the biggest population that wasn't catered by anybody till that particular point were the people who maybe decided on the same day of making the voting. So they had their own agenda and anything, but because they were not vocal about it, nobody actually looked upon them as any kind of potential opponent or potential supporter. And in any country, that's the biggest population that you will be having, not just India, across the. So these Twitter things and everything, if you are able to present alternate opinions and understanding of a situation, people are not stupid. I mean, they are, but not all of them. So the agitating ones aren't really, but most of the time people are thoughtful, and especially these dormant ones. So any kind of protest, be it dormant or be it via physicality, it accounts for. It doesn't mean that just because you are writing something, it wouldn't have somebody else's opinion being changed. Why else do you think government spends so much of money on creating narrations? Had that not been the case, government wouldn't have been spending so much money, not just in India, across, marketing their campaigns, policies, like plastering the entire city with promotions and campaigns and other things. Because you don't need to come out and protest. You can sit back at your home and you can still protest.
Blocking should also be seen like social media, like blocking internet per se is actually should be seen from a point of view of, because internet increasingly in this digital age is sort of getting to a point where it should be a basic sort of right to have access to internet. I am not
particularly sure that you should be classifying it as a right now, but it seems like, right, everything happens on internet. And actually what happens is, I think now there is research actually with from the Internet Freedom Foundation, for example, in Delhi, that internet, like blocking internet, actually does a
The
lot of
one
harm.
particular scenario that you're scared, you know things are like scary around you. I blindfold you. Would that make you more scared or would it comfort you? And cutting internet off is like putting a blindfold on a person standing on a highway. But I believe that even if you cut down internet of a specific area, you probably are cutting out the common people, but not the entire administration system.
Yeah, but the point is the trouble is being caused, or people are either getting harmed or harming people who are in the local. They are not in the, so it's not like, so you are actually throttling the flow of information, right?
Yeah.
You can communicate between each other. That I don't know. I'm not an expert, so maybe you are communicating, but you are not getting any signal as to where is the problem happening, right? And you think anybody in India who thinks that the government always has the wherewithal to always know very quickly where the problem is?
No, 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 it
Without
doesn't.
internet
It
now, it is
doesn't.
not,
It
doesn't.
doesn't.
So then you don't know.
So for the common people, internet connection never works out in a positive manner, no matter what government has to say about it, that they were able to subside it or anything as such. They are not. People get more chaotic, people get more scared, and even a misfired engine sounds like a gunshot. So it doesn't do good to anybody at all. So maybe we have to do another session to come up with something productive.
Uh,
ठीक है
okay.
They
Chalo, bye bye.